My sister turned our dad against me and stole my inheritance with lies. I stayed quiet, until I uncovered the one truth that shattered everything we thought was family. Hi, I'm Julia Reed, and I'm 33 years old. I always believed blood made us safe. Turns out, sometimes it's the blade that cuts deepest. What happened to me could happen to anyone who trusts family blindly and assumes love conquers all. If you've ever been betrayed by someone you called family, if you've ever wondered whether justice really exists, then this story is for you. Drop a comment and let me know if you've ever had to fight for what's rightfully yours, because I want to hear your stories too. Hit that like button if you believe the truth always finds a way, and make sure you're subscribed because the twists in this story will leave you speechless. This is how I discovered the one truth that shattered everything we thought was family. Vanessa was sunshine when Dad was watching and a thunderstorm when he wasn't. Growing up, she had this way of making everything about her while somehow making it look effortless and charming. When Dad praised my report cards, she'd suddenly need help with something urgent. When I got accepted to college, she threw a tantrum about feeling left out that lasted 3 days. But I have to admit, she was genuinely caring when it mattered. When Dad had his knee surgery 2 years ago, Vanessa moved back home for a month to help him recover. She organized his medications, drove him to physical therapy, and made sure he ate proper meals instead of cereal for dinner. She called me responsible, like it was a disease, rolling her eyes at my organized lists and careful budgets. "Julia's so boring," she'd say with a laugh that made Dad chuckle and shake his head indulgently. "Always planning everything to death." He'd pat her hand the way you do with a charming daughter who brings light into your life. I kept the peace because that's what oldest daughters do. We smooth over conflicts, make excuses for everyone else's behavior, and swallow our hurt feelings with a smile. I told myself she was just younger, just different, just finding her way in the world. But looking back now, I can see she was already rehearsing my downfall. Every eye roll, every dismissive comment, every moment she positioned herself as the fun one while painting me as the uptight older sister, it was all preparation for the day she'd convince Dad I didn't deserve his love or his legacy. The first real warning sign came when Dad casually mentioned updating his will over Sunday dinner. Nothing dramatic, just a passing comment about getting his affairs in order now that he was getting older. But I noticed how Vanessa's fork paused halfway to her mouth, how her eyes sharpened with sudden interest. After that night, she started staying late after family dinners, volunteering to help Dad with dishes and pouring him tea while they talked in low voices. I'd walk into the den to say goodnight, and their conversation would snap shut like a book, leaving an uncomfortable silence hanging in the air. Vanessa began planting seeds so subtly I almost didn't notice. "Julia's been so stressed with work lately," she'd mention casually. "Maybe she needs some space to focus on her career instead of worrying about family finances." She'd smile that sweet smile that never quite reached her eyes, and Dad would nod thoughtfully. "Don't be so sensitive," Vanessa would purr when I asked what they were discussing. "We're just catching up." Dad loves hearing about my adventures, and I love helping him stay organized. Slowly, Dad's texts to me changed from warm messages with heart emojis to brief, formal responses with periods. His calls became shorter, his visits less frequent. When I asked if everything was okay, he'd assure me it was fine, but his eyes wouldn't meet mine anymore. By the time the lawyer called to inform me about the updated will, I was already cut out completely. Vanessa had poisoned him against me so thoroughly that I didn't even see it coming. The humiliation reached its peak at our monthly Sunday supper. I'd been looking forward to it all week, hoping to reconnect with Dad and figure out what had gone wrong between us. But Vanessa was there early, already settled in like she owned the place, pouring wine and laughing at her own jokes. During dinner, she started making little comments about my life. Julia's probably too busy with her spreadsheets to visit more often, she said with a giggle. She only comes around when she can schedule it 3 weeks in advance. Remember when you needed help with those insurance forms, Dad? She said she'd get to it when her calendar opened up. I wanted to protest that I'd been swamped with a major project deadline, but Dad was already nodding with disappointment. Then Dad cleared his throat and said something that stopped my heart. Actually, that's something I wanted to discuss. Vanessa's going to handle the estate planning and family affairs from now on. Julia's a bit too rigid for dealing with people, and we need someone with a softer touch. The words hit me like a slap. Vanessa reached over and squeezed my hand in fake sympathy. Don't worry, Jules. I'll take good care of everything. Her voice was honey-sweet, but her eyes were triumphant. I smiled like a statue and nodded graciously, swallowing the humiliation and hurt until I could barely breathe. But that night, I packed a bag and left for my apartment. Not to give up, but to start fighting back. Back at my apartment, I pulled out Mom's old cedar chest from storage, chasing comfort in her belongings and hoping to find some clarity. Mom had died when Vanessa was 12, and I'd inherited her organizational habits along with her jewelry box and photo albums. As I sorted through the papers, I started noticing subtle discrepancies I'd never paid attention to before. Mom's handwriting in her journal entries around Vanessa's birth seemed different, more careful, more strained than her usual flowing script. The dates of certain appointments didn't align with what I remembered Dad telling us about that time. I found Dad's old notebook where he'd recorded our milestones. His handwriting was soft and proud when he wrote about my first steps, my first words, my school achievements. But when he wrote about Vanessa, the pen strokes seemed different, more careful, more forced, like he was trying to convince himself of something. There were tiny inconsistencies in insurance forms and early school enrollment papers that individually meant nothing but together painted a strange picture. Hospital records that mentioned different attending physicians, forms with slightly different dates than what family story suggested. Something about Vanessa's origin story didn't add up, and I was determined to balance the equation. If she wanted to play games with inheritance and family loyalty, I'd make sure we were playing with all the facts on the table. I hired Cole Ramirez, a private investigator who came highly recommended for family cases. He was quiet and methodical, the kind of man who preferred facts over drama and had patience for long, complicated searches through old records. Cole started by tracing hospital staff rosters from the night Vanessa was born. There had been a severe storm that evening, and the hospital was short-staffed due to power outages and transportation issues. Several nurses had been called in last minute to handle emergency deliveries. One name kept appearing in the records near Mom's chart, Paula Kim, a night nurse who'd worked that shift. Cole found her current address and phone number, but when he first approached her, she was hesitant to talk about something that happened over 20 years ago. She remembers something, Cole told me during our meeting. But she's scared. Inheritance disputes can get ugly, and she doesn't want to get pulled into family drama. If there's a seam in this story, though, she's the one who knows where it's split. When I finally called Paula myself and explained who I was, there was a long pause before she asked, "Are you the older daughter?" Her voice had a tremor that made my pulse quicken. Something in her tone told me she'd been waiting for this call for 20 years. Paula agreed to meet me at a quiet diner across town, away from the hospital where she still worked part-time. She was a small woman with gray-streaked hair and careful eyes that seemed to hold decades of secrets. "I never forgot that night," she said, stirring her coffee with shaking hands. There was a last-minute transfer from another hospital due to complications. A young woman in labor, very upset, crying for someone who wasn't there yet. She described a frantic scene, a mother in distress, medical staff scrambling to handle multiple emergencies, and a man who arrived just before delivery but seemed confused about the procedures and paperwork. I kept my head down and did my job, Paula whispered, glancing around the diner nervously. But I never forgot that man's face. He didn't match the information on the charts, didn't know things a husband should know. When I asked about insurance and emergency contacts, he fumbled for answers. Paula wouldn't say more without some kind of protection. She'd seen too many inheritance wars turn nasty and destroy innocent people who got caught in the middle. Cole drafted a formal witness statement, and after reading it carefully, Paula signed with hands that trembled slightly. Her final line made my heart stop. The man who claimed to be the father wasn't Thomas Reed. Cole dug deeper into Vanessa's recent financial situation and found a mess of maxed-out credit cards, boutique store loans, and personal debts that were spiraling out of control. She'd borrowed against her car and jewelry, and debt collectors had been calling her phone for weeks. Vanessa needed serious money, and fast. I was the main obstacle standing between her and Dad's estate, the responsible daughter who'd always been his obvious choice to manage family finances. She's not just jealous of your relationship with your father, Cole explained. She's desperate. When people get this deep in debt with the wrong kind of creditors, they'll do anything to get out. Your inheritance isn't just her goal, it's her lifeline. Dad had praised my stability and financial sense his whole life. When he'd hinted that I'd eventually manage the estate and take care of family business, Vanessa must have tasted that praise like vinegar. She'd spent years being the fun, carefree daughter while I was the boring, responsible one. But now she saw that responsibility as a threat to her survival. Jealousy wasn't just a motive anymore, it was a desperate mission to secure her future at my expense. She'd convinced Dad I was too controlling and busy to care about family, while positioning herself as the devoted daughter who'd always be there for him. While I gathered evidence about Vanessa's true parentage, she was busy gathering signatures for a more immediate power grab. She spent weeks softening Dad up with emotional manipulation, claiming that watching him struggle with paperwork and appointments broke her heart. Julia's always so busy with her career, she told him with tears in her eyes. I just want to help lighten your load, Dad. Let me handle the boring stuff so you can focus on enjoying life. She convinced him to sign a limited power of attorney, framing it as a loving daughter's gift to an aging father. Within a week of getting that signature, she listed Mom's lake cabin for sale. It was Mom's favorite place, where we'd spent every summer as kids, where Dad still went to remember her. I raced to the realtor's office and stalled the sale by asking detailed questions that only the actual property owner could answer. The agent frowned, sensing something wasn't right about the whole situation. There seemed to be some family communication issues here, he said diplomatically. I think we need to postpone until everyone's on the same page. That evening, I received something much more threatening than a text message. A formal letter from Henderson & Associates Legal Services arrived at my apartment, claiming that my interference in legitimate family business constituted harassment and threatening defamation charges if I continued. The letterhead looked professional, but when I called the phone number, it went straight to voicemail. Vanessa was escalating her psychological warfare. I visited Dad the next day, hoping to understand what had changed between us and maybe plant some seeds of doubt about Vanessa's recent behavior. I found him in his study, looking older and more tired than I remembered. Trying to reconnect, I asked about the lullaby he used to sing when I was scared of thunderstorms as a little girl. His face softened, and he hummed 3 notes with a gentle smile. Your mother loved how much you looked like me, he said, his voice warm with memory. She'd say you had my stubborn chin and my way of thinking through problems step by step. Carefully, I asked about the night Vanessa was born, mentioning how Mom's journal entries from that time seemed different somehow. Dad's expression clouded over, and he stared out the window for a long moment. There was a test once, he began, then stopped himself, shaking his head. Some things are better left buried. Before he could finish that thought, Vanessa walked in with a clipboard and her brightest smile. "Dad, we need to go over these property management documents," she announced, effectively ending our conversation. But I'd heard enough. The doubt in his voice, the unfinished sentence about a test. Dad had suspected something for years but had chosen to bury it rather than face the truth. Cole helped me set up discrete DNA testing through a reputable mail-order company. When I explained to Dad that I needed to understand our family medical history for health reasons, he agreed to the test without much question. I swabbed my cheek in Dad's, sealed the samples carefully, and sent them off with a prayer that the postal system would be kind to us. But Vanessa had started hovering around Dad's house like a wasp, suddenly doting and present in a way that felt calculated rather than caring. She volunteered to pick up his mail, offered to handle his appointments, and kept finding excuses to be there whenever I tried to visit. It was like she sensed something shifting and was trying to maintain control of the situation. The results arrived in my email at 2:12 in the morning, 3 weeks later. I was wide awake instantly, heart pounding as I opened the attachment with trembling hands. The probability of paternity for Vanessa read, 0%. I stared at the screen until my eyes burned, reading those numbers over and over again. 24 years of family dinners, birthday parties, Christmas mornings, and bedtime stories, all of it built on a lie that was about to change everything. A home DNA test wouldn't hold up in court, so we needed official documentation with proper chain of custody. Dr. Elena Markov at an accredited laboratory agreed to supervise a second test with strict legal protocols. When I scheduled Dad's appointment, Vanessa tried to tag along, claiming she wanted transparency in all family health matters. But the lab required individual appointments with proper identification, and somehow Vanessa's appointment request never got processed. Dr. Markov personally notarized every step of the collection and testing process. She understood the legal implications and made sure everything would be admissible if we ended up in court. But then Adult Protective Services knocked on my door with a complaint that made my stomach drop. Someone had filed an anonymous report claiming I was exploiting Dad's declining mental capacity and pressuring him into medical tests he didn't understand. The investigator was professional but serious, asking detailed questions about my recent interactions with Dad. I showed him my calendar, my receipts, even a video of me at a work conference during the time I'd supposedly been coercing Dad about medical procedures. "Ma'am," he said, closing his notebook, "do you happen to know anyone named Vanessa who might have reason to cause trouble for you? Because this complaint mentions concerns about fraudulent DNA testing, which suggests someone knows exactly what kind of medical testing you've been doing." Vanessa wasn't just trying to intercept results anymore, she was using the system to attack me preemptively. The official DNA results confirmed what I already knew: Vanessa was not biologically related to Dad. Dr. Markov had agreed to testify about the testing procedures, and Cole had secured Paula's sworn statement about the night of Vanessa's birth. I thought I was ready to breathe, to finally confront Vanessa with the truth and expose her schemes. But she was still one step ahead of me. She called a family meeting at Dad's house, claiming she had important news to share about family finances. When I arrived, I found Dad looking confused and upset, sitting across from Vanessa and a nervous-looking man I'd never seen before. "Julia, I'd like you to meet Raymond Ellis," Vanessa announced with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "He has some very interesting information about our family that I think you need to hear." Raymond was a thin man with shifty eyes who kept fidgeting with his hands. He looked like someone who'd been coached but wasn't entirely comfortable with his role. "I'm here to tell you that Julia isn't Thomas Reed's biological daughter either," he said, his voice shaking slightly. "I had an affair with your mother 24 years ago, and Julia is my child, not his." The room spun around me as Vanessa's trap snapped shut. She'd found a way to neutralize my DNA evidence by claiming I wasn't Dad's real daughter either. Raymond pulled out what looked like a handwritten letter from Mom, dated from around the time of my birth. The paper seemed authentic, aged and yellowed, with Mom's distinctive handwriting acknowledging an affair and naming Raymond as my biological father. But Cole, who'd been quietly observing from the corner, caught my eye and raised an eyebrow. His trained investigator's instincts were picking up inconsistencies that most people would miss. "It's interesting that you'd come forward now," Cole said to Raymond calmly. "Especially since I have bank records showing a $5,000 cash withdrawal from Vanessa's account 3 days ago, and your landlord mentioned you were about to be evicted for non-payment of rent." Raymond's face went pale, and he glanced nervously at Vanessa. She'd clearly promised him money to play along with this charade, banking on his desperation to make him a convincing liar. The letter's date didn't quite match other documents from that period, and when I looked closely at the postmark on the envelope, the stamp series was wrong for that year. Small details that most people would miss, but Cole's expertise in document fraud was showing. I decided to test Raymond's story with a simple question that anyone who'd really known Mom would answer easily. "What color was Mom's birthstone?" I asked quietly. Raymond hesitated, then guessed, "Blue? Sapphire?" Wrong. Mom's birthday was in May, her birthstone was emerald, and she wore her emerald ring every single day until she died. Anyone who'd been close enough to have an affair with her would have known that basic fact. While we'd been fighting over forged letters and false claims, Vanessa reneged documentation. I drove out to the cabin at dawn, my heart breaking as I saw the "sold" sign in the front yard and a lockbox on the porch. But I still had keys from all those childhood summers, and I wasn't ready to let go of Mom's favorite place without a fight. I remembered how Mom always seemed protective of the attic space, telling us kids it was too dangerous to play up there. As an adult, I'd assumed she was just being cautious about old wooden beams and stored furniture. But now, climbing those creaky stairs, I wondered if she'd been guarding something more important. Hidden behind some old Christmas decorations, I found her cedar chest, different from the one I'd searched through at my apartment. Inside, wrapped in tissue paper, was a delicate music box I'd never seen before. When I opened it, the tiny ballerina spun to the exact 3-note melody Dad had hummed, Mom's favorite lullaby. Under the pink satin lining, my fingers found something unexpected. A tiny brass key and a slip of paper with the name of a bank I'd never heard of. Mom had hidden something important, and Vanessa's desperation to sell the cabin suddenly made perfect sense. At the bank, I presented Mom's key and identification to a clerk who looked like she'd been working there since the building opened. She led me to a small room lined with safety deposit boxes and used 2 keys, the one I'd found and a master key, to open box 247. Inside was a collection of documents that made my hands shake. A notarized letter from Mom in her own handwriting, a Polaroid photograph of Mom and Raymond Ellis in what looked like a medical clinic waiting room, and a sealed legal envelope addressed, "To my husband, if truth becomes necessary." The notary's signature belonged to Aunt May, Mom's elderly neighbor who'd been like a grandmother to us growing up. If anyone would know Mom's deepest secrets, it would be May. I called Aunt May from the bank parking lot, my heart pounding so hard I could barely speak clearly. "Julia, honey?" May's voice was surprised but warm. "How are you, dear?" "Aunt May, I found Mom's safety deposit box and some documents that you notarized. I need to ask you about the night Vanessa was born." There was a long pause, then a deep sigh that seemed to carry decades of weight. "I wondered how long it would take before you found that box," she said quietly. "I've been waiting for this phone call for 20 years. Aunt May invited me over for tea, just like when I was little and needed someone to talk to about school problems or friend drama. But this conversation was going to be much more serious than anything we discussed over her kitchen table before. Your mother came to me in tears one night when Vanessa was about 6 months old, May began, her wrinkled hands steady around her teacup. She'd had a brief affair during a difficult time in her marriage, and she was terrified the truth would destroy your father. May described Mom's anguish about keeping such a huge secret, her fear that Dad would leave if he found out, and her desperate love for both her daughters despite the complicated circumstances of their birth. She begged me to notarize a statement about what really happened, just in case the past ever came back to hurt the future, May continued. She wanted to be honest about Vanessa's paternity while protecting both girls from adult mistakes. May confirmed every detail, the date, the letter, the clinic where the DNA test had been done back then, and Mom and Dad's decision to raise both girls as their own without labels or explanations. She would testify to all of it if necessary. As I was leaving, another threatening letter from the fake law firm was waiting in my mailbox. This time it claimed I was harassing elderly witnesses and threatened criminal charges. Vanessa was getting more desperate and more dangerous. I contacted attorney Avery Holt, who specialized in inheritance disputes and family law. He reviewed all my evidence methodically, the DNA tests, Paula's witness statement, Mom's safety deposit box documents, and Aunt May's testimony. Your sister has been busy, he said grimly. The fake legal threats, the bribery attempt with Raymond Ellis, the Adult Protective Services complaint, she's running a comprehensive campaign to discredit you before you can expose her. Avery filed a formal petition to contest Dad's updated will and requested a court hearing to present evidence of fraud. But he warned me that Vanessa would likely escalate her tactics as the legal pressure increased. He was right. 2 days later, Dad received a formal-looking document claiming to be a forensic handwriting analysis that supposedly proved Mom's safety deposit box letter was a forgery created by me. The document was professionally formatted with fake laboratory letterheads and technical language designed to confuse rather than inform. But when Avery called the lab listed on the report, they'd never heard of the case or the supposed analyst who'd signed it. Vanessa was creating an entire alternate reality of false evidence, betting that she could overwhelm the truth with sheer volume of lies. But every fake document was also evidence of her desperation and criminal fraud. The court hearing was scheduled for the following week. Vanessa arrived with her lawyer and a thick folder of documents, looking confident but more brittle than I'd ever seen her. The stress was starting to show in the tight lines around her eyes and the way her hands trembled slightly when she thought no one was looking. Her attorney presented what they claimed was an updated codicil to Dad's will, supposedly signed just weeks before our legal battle began. The document named her sole heir due to my estrangement and history of financial manipulation. But Avery immediately spotted problems. The paper practically sang with fresh laser printer toner, and the font was a modern typeface that didn't exist when it was supposedly signed. More importantly, the signature had been traced from an old mortgage document. Cole had found the original in Dad's files. Your Honor, Avery said calmly, we request forensic document analysis of this codicil, as well as examination of several other questionable documents the defendant has produced. Vanessa's lawyer objected, but the judge was already frowning at the obvious inconsistencies. When questioned directly, Vanessa tried to maintain her composure, but cracks were starting to show. These are legitimate family documents, she insisted, but her voice had a desperate edge. Julia's been manipulating my father for months, trying to turn him against me because she's jealous of our close relationship. The judge ordered a recess for expert examination, but I could see that Vanessa's carefully constructed facade was finally beginning to crumble under scrutiny. During the recess, Cole presented Avery with more damaging evidence. Security camera footage showed Vanessa in a hospital parking lot, passing an envelope to a lab technician who'd had access to DNA testing databases. The technician, now facing criminal charges and cooperating with authorities in exchange for leniency, admitted he'd been paid to attempt altering database entries to create doubt about our test results. His testimony would demonstrate a clear pattern of evidence tampering and bribery. When court reconvened, Dr. Markov took the stand with duplicate backup records and a tamper log showing exactly when someone had tried to access our case file inappropriately. Her testimony was calm, professional, and devastating to Vanessa's credibility. But Vanessa wasn't finished fighting. As Avery began presenting evidence of her financial desperation and debt problems, she interrupted with calculated desperation. "Your Honor, this is character assassination," she said, standing despite her lawyer's attempts to silence her. "My sister is trying to destroy me with lies because she can't accept that our father chose me over her." The judge's expression hardened. "Ms. Reed, you'll have your opportunity to respond through your attorney. Please be seated." But the outburst revealed exactly what Avery wanted the court to see, someone who was losing control because the truth was finally catching up with her lies. Avery called Aunt May to the witness stand, and the elderly woman entered the courtroom carrying her original notary ledger from 24 years ago. Her hands might have been shaky with age, but her memory was crystal clear and her testimony rang with authentic emotion. She described Mom's visit that terrible night, the anguish of a woman torn between love and guilt, and the careful documentation she'd helped create to protect the truth for future generations. "That poor girl was torn apart by guilt and love," May said, her voice carrying across the silent courtroom. "She loved Thomas, she loved both her daughters, and she was terrified that the truth would destroy everyone she cared about." Rather than presenting new evidence, this testimony provided the emotional context that made all the other proof meaningful. Dad was sitting in the front row, tears streaming down his face as he listened to the story of Mom's secret pain and sacrifice. Vanessa stared at May with something approaching panic, all her confidence finally drained away. The weight of authentic emotion and genuine love was crushing her carefully constructed lies. The judge looked at the sealed envelope May had brought, the one addressed to Dad that had been waiting in the safety deposit box for over 2 decades. "Mrs. Patterson," the judge said solemnly, "I believe it's time to open your daughter's final message to her husband." The moment of absolute truth had finally arrived. Dad's hands shook as the court clerk helped him open Mom's sealed letter. The courtroom was so quiet you could hear paper rustling as he unfolded the pages she'd written 24 years ago. The letter was heartbreaking in its honesty. Mom admitted to the affair with Raymond Ellis during a difficult period in her marriage, confessed that Vanessa was not Dad's biological child, and begged him to forgive her weakness while asking him never to punish the girls for adult mistakes. "I love you, Thomas," Dad read aloud, his voice breaking. "I love both our daughters, no matter how they came to us. Please don't let my failures destroy the family we've built together." Dad sobbed into his hands while Vanessa stared at the letter with hollow eyes. The truth was finally spoken in Mom's own words, with love and sorrow but undeniable clarity. Avery quietly placed the DNA test results beside Mom's confession, the scientific proof matching perfectly with her written words from decades ago. This wasn't about legal technicalities anymore, it was about a mother's love and a family's complicated truth. The judge studied both documents carefully, then looked up at the assembled families with an expression of profound sadness mixed with determination. "We will take a 15-minute recess," he announced. "When we return, I'll render my decision on this inheritance dispute." Those 15 minutes felt like 15 hours, but I knew the truth had finally found its voice. Before the recess even began, Dad pulled me aside in the courthouse hallway. His eyes were red from crying, but his voice was steady and filled with remorse. "I got a fraud alert from the bank this morning," he said quietly. $20,000 transferred without my knowledge. I didn't understand what was happening until now. He'd already suspected Vanessa was stealing from him, but the letter and testimony had connected all the pieces. During our conversation, Vanessa approached with her composure completely shattered. "You've stolen my entire life," she whisper-screamed at me, her perfectly manicured nails digging crescents into her palms. "I grew up in that house, I called him Dad, I loved him as my father. You can't just erase 24 years because of some stupid blood test." Her debt collectors had been calling all week, she admitted through angry tears. The money she'd taken from Dad's accounts was already gone, spent on minimum payments and desperate attempts to buy more time. "If I go down because of this, you're going down with me," she hissed, backing me against the wall. But Dad heard every word. "Vanessa," he said with quiet authority, "we need to talk about what you've done to our family. The lying, the stealing, the manipulation, none of this was about love. It was about money." Even in her desperation, Vanessa had revealed the truth about her motivations. The betrayal was complete. When court reconvened, the judge had clearly made his decision. Dr. Patel, the forensic document examiner, presented his analysis of Vanessa's forged codicil. The evidence was overwhelming: mismatched toner composition, modern paper fiber content, and a signature that had been traced from an old mortgage document. "The codicil is hereby voided as fraudulent," the judge declared. "The DNA evidence is admitted and confirms that Ms. Vanessa Reed is not the biological child of Thomas Reed." But the most important moment came when the judge addressed the inheritance question directly. "Mr. Reed," he said to my father, "in light of these revelations, do you wish to make any changes to your estate planning?" Dad stood slowly, looking directly at Vanessa with sadness but no anger. "Your Honor, I've already prepared a new will with my attorney. Vanessa will receive nothing from my estate. Julia will inherit everything, as she should have from the beginning." The judge nodded. "The amended will is accepted and entered into the record. Furthermore, I'm referring this matter to the district attorney for prosecution of document fraud, elder financial abuse, and perjury." Vanessa's face went white as the reality of criminal charges hit her. This wasn't just about losing an inheritance anymore, she was facing prison time for her crimes. Avery had warned me this moment would come, but seeing Vanessa's world collapse completely still felt surreal. The judge's ruling was comprehensive and final. Vanessa had no legal claim to Dad's inheritance, her forged documents constituted criminal fraud, and the illegal sale of the lake cabin was voided and would be reversed. Outside the courthouse, reporters asked questions about the inheritance fraud case while Vanessa met with her attorney about the criminal charges she was facing. She looked smaller somehow, deflated by the weight of her collapsed lies and the reality of serious legal consequences. When she approached me one final time, there was no anger left in her voice, just exhaustion and regret. "Was proving you were right worth destroying what we used to be?" she asked quietly. "Was it worth all this pain and publicity?" I looked at the woman who'd called herself my sister for 24 years, who'd shared birthdays and holidays and childhood memories, who'd ultimately tried to steal my father's love and my family's legacy through manipulation and fraud. "I didn't destroy what we used to be, Vanessa," I said sadly. "You did that when you chose lies and theft over love and honesty. I just stopped letting you destroy me in the process." Dad came over and put his arm around my shoulders. "I'm sorry I let her turn me against you," he said. "I should have seen through the manipulation. I should have trusted the daughter who was always honest with me. For the first time in months, I felt like I had my father back. I used part of my inheritance to restore Mom's lake cabin and establish a scholarship fund in her memory for children of single mothers, because I learned that love can be messy and complicated and still be real and meaningful. Dad moved in with me for a few months while we rebuilt our relationship and learned how to speak honestly to each other again. We cooked simple dinners together and shared stories about Mom that we'd never told before, healing old wounds with patience and forgiveness. Vanessa pled guilty to fraud charges and was sentenced to 2 years in prison with restitution requirements. Despite everything she'd done, I genuinely hoped she'd use that time to reflect and find the courage to build an honest life when she got out. I didn't win because she lost. I won because the truth finally had a voice after years of being silenced by manipulation and fear. If this story touched you, if you've ever had to fight for the truth against family members who tried to deceive you, I want to hear about it in the comments. Have you ever discovered that someone you trusted was living a lie? How did you handle it? Did you choose justice or did you walk away? Your stories matter, and sharing them helps others who might be facing similar battles. Hit that like button if you believe truth and justice can prevail even against family betrayal, and subscribe for more incredible stories of people who refuse to let liars win. The next story I'm sharing will absolutely blow your mind. Trust me, you won't want to miss it. And that's the thing about truth, it doesn't need to shout or fight or scheme. It just needs to be patient enough to outlast all the lies, because lies are temporary but truth is forever.